Remember that they're changing my voice. Before I begin, I'd like to point out that it infuriates me that LGBT people think that they're entitled to change people's expression and the way they sound and look at their videos to look LGBT. It is unbelievably sickening, and it reflects very poorly, very, very poorly on their community. And there must be some of them who know that it's outrageous, but they just don't speak on it, and that reflects poorly on their community. And that's what this video is about. It's about the three major problems that face America: white supremacy, Jewish supremacy, and LGBT supremacy. And they're made much, much, much worse by these groups blaming other people. They might blame immigrants, right? It might be a Republican LGBT person blaming immigrants. It might be a white person, Jewish person. They might blame black people, what have you. So let's put this thing to rest once and for all, because there's a lot of people spending a lot of time and money confusing this issue to the best of their ability. And when you don't come together and explain, hey, they're wrong about that, and you get some dumb inbred white person saying, well, everyone knows that. Okay, but they're not getting together. Everyone knows homelessness is a problem, but they're not getting together, and that requires going through the fundamentals. We say these are the problems and this is the solution. So one of the major proofs that white denial exists is all those ignorant white people saying everyone knows that, and saying here we go again. That's called denial. That's called avoiding the argument and the solution. And that's why I will never, ever, ever be proud to be part white, ever. I might be closer to proud one day, but I'll never be proud, because they went so far with it, and they kept going, and they kept going. After slavery, after, desegregation, they kept going. And they kept doing it out of greed, out of cowardice, out of foolishness. They kept going. It's also why I'll never be proud to be part, and just ever so slightly part Jewish. It doesn't really show itself in terms of dramatic gene expression. I don't look like a black Bill Gates or something. They try to fume and poison me and change my way I look, by making it so I'm less kind of athletic in that African way. And they do things like that, right? Mess up my health and my nutrition. It kind of changes the look of my face. So a lot of Jews, no offense, they look very malnutritioned, right? They look like they're neurodivergent. No offense to anybody. I'm just telling the facts here, not racist. If someone who's part Jewish can't explain this, then who the hell can? You think it shouldn't be explained? That's stupid. So when we look at this situation, first of all, let's rule out the idea that immigrants are magically breaking down the country. They could change their immigration policy. They could create a region for the excess immigrants, and they could have them pile in there. It's very simple. They refuse to do that because they're racist, because they're evil, because they want to sexually control these people. When I say they, I mean, whoever the shoe may fit, whatever percentage of whites, Jews, and LGBT. Now, part of what people don't understand is everyone who doesn't obey God through me is evil regardless of race. That's a more complex topic for another day. Well, we can see that by the scripture on the screen, right? One who slackens his work is brother to one who destroys. So if you sit there like Eeyore from, the cartoons, you sit there like some kind of hoggle, some kind of simp, some kind of scared coward, shivering under a blanket. And you're like, come on, guys, just keep your head down. And instead of facing the oppressors in your race, then you're part of the problem. You are brother to the oppressors, and you're seeking to benefit from that invisible package of unearned assets on a spectrum. Is a homeless white person as rich as a rich white person? No. Does he get women as much? No. Does he have the same social status? No. But is there an overall white privilege? Yes. Are Republicans who pretend that doesn't exist and is an extreme disgrace and an example of modern day racism on a spectrum? Yes. Do you think that there's some towns here that you can't go in? Okay, first of all, there's more white people than black people. So if there was the equal amount of racism in America, okay, there would be less places you could go if you were black without being harassed, what have you, right? Because there's simply more white people. So you have a certain privilege just by the fact that this is for you, by you, and you're the majority. To act like that's not a privilege makes one a fucking dumb son of a bitch, a fucking disgrace. So when we look at the situation, how did blacks get here? First of all, it was a white system for white people by white people. They took them here as slaves, and eventually some of them came on their own, like my father, okay, more or less in a war that the white man kind of started behind the scenes, a story for another day. So they came here, okay, and they started to assimilate into a white system, right? As slaves, eventually segregation, they're being told what to do unfairly consistently. And the unfairness continues to this day. It's not something that they waved their magic wand and all the problems of white supremacy went away. They're still alive and well. Okay, it's just the evolution of white supremacy. So when we look at the problems today, the fact that more white people are arrested than black people, okay, black people are disproportionately arrested, but more white people are arrested. Okay, that isn't the major reason why I'm right. Nowhere near. The fact that something like 70% of arrests in 2025 are white people is nowhere near the major proof that white supremacy is the problem and that most criminal acts in America are done by white people. Nowhere near the major proof. Now, because they're the majority, you'd expect them to commit more of the crimes, right? If everything is equal and so on and so forth. However, when they downplay that the major crimes, the high level, affect a lot of people on a very dramatic way, crimes are done by white people, it creates a huge problem. It's like focusing on jaywalking instead of child trafficking. It creates this massive problem. It's like focusing on somebody smoking weed in public instead of focusing on gang violence. It creates a massive, 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 massive problem. And when people want me to not continue describing it so people don't get through their heads, that's called obstruction of justice. And when we're talking about crimes against humanity that cause 2 million plus preventable American deaths every year, 9 million people die of starvation in the world every year, these types of crimes, it is an extreme problem. The major problems that face America have to do with white supremacy, Jewish supremacy, and LGBT supremacy. By far. By so far. And people need to get that through their heads. When you pretend that's not the case, you worsen the problem. You exacerbate the problem. You contribute to it. You continue the problem. That's why the word con is in continue. Because as you join the con and downplay what the major problems are, as you prevent the process of prioritization, write that word down, prioritization, you prevent people from solving these major problems, like the structure of the economy. Even the Pope said, the Pope is white, said it's an economy that kills. An economy that kills. It creates a domino effect, and part of that domino effect is gang violence, domestic violence, ridiculous amounts of rape, what have you. But the major problem, the root cause, the major root cause, the determinant, is how society's structured and how people respond to the problems and their lack of response, the lack of a logical response. So I can say with certainty and with a clear conscience, knowing it's correct, that the major problems that we face today are white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacy. There's massive amount of economic disparity. There are people who pretend that it's acceptable. They are pretending that the top 50%, almost all of them are, all the riches of them, almost all of them, if not all of them, are complete scum. Nowhere near worth. They don't deserve to make 100 grand a year, much less to be worth billions and hundreds of millions. Complete scum. They're pretending that it's okay for them to have 170 trillion, while the bottom 50 have 2 to 4 trillion. To them, they can't imagine, if the bottom 50 had had somewhere around 20 trillion instead, and the top 50 had 150 trillion instead. They can't imagine that that's more fair for the life of them. Monsters who pretend that when you make people poor, that you don't cause them to have more stressors and more temptations, that you're not creating more crime, robbery, more pettiness and jealousy. As people get poor, they get very petty quite often. Rich people are petty too much. And quite often they get very petty. They forget. They slip into survival mode and they commit crimes. And they lash out. And they do drugs and so on and so forth. They act like that has nothing to do with anything. They act like wealth distribution has nothing to do with anything. If anyone argues that they should increase income tax on the wealthy, say 1%. They scream communism. Because they're reinforcing white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacy. They want to debate me? No. Because they know they're just a fucking worm, a flag-waving muppet who puts the idea of white supremacy, which they believe the American flag symbolizes, mind you, above what is morally correct. They don't care how many people, including whites and Jews, get molested and raped, as long as they feel like they're winning. Because they're afraid to face that ugly demon inside of them and the governing class, which is white supremacy. The Jews and the LGBT people, they operate within white supremacy, right? So Greek and Roman culture, white culture, Neo-Greek and Roman culture. And the fraternities, right? A bunch of gayish looking people, and they're whites, and they're Jews, and they're whitewashed fraternities, and quite often black fraternities are unofficial fraternities, not recognized by schools because they came later, and that's part of white supremacy as well. Not that it would help very much if they were recognized, because they are whitewashed people afraid to face white supremacy. There's uncontrolled opposition. Now I want you to picture two people. One is a drug addict who's Asian and he's a hippie and he's in the woods, okay, and he's meditating. And the other is Ip Man, except for he's monotheistic. Now, the drug addict in the woods argues that he thinks that nature is the Almighty, which it's not. And Ip Man argues, this monotheistic Ip Man, right, that God is greater because God is more intense and his spirit comes down at certain times in certain ways, okay, for the divine order, and he presents a superior lifestyle. Now let's think about one more person, someone who's the top martial artist ever possible, me. And I'm sabotaged. I'm sabotaged by the first person who also decides to start sabotaging the monotheistic Ip Man type. Okay, so that person is like a bunch of dead weeds complaining about a very lush and impressive garden. And then he decides to mess up that garden. And says, how about now? So he's already presenting an inferior lifestyle, a state of being, an argument that doesn't make sense, right? How could mere plants and their energy be the same as a potent, morally precise spirit that's otherworldly, that's transcendent? So how could the mere energy of this earth be comparable to a morally precise, potent spirit that's otherworldly, that's transcendent? So his state is inferior, his argument is inferior. And then he resorted to sabotage. So it is with the white, Jewish, and LGBT elite and their massive networks, and the churches, the mosques, the synagogues. They're slacking their work. Therefore, they're part and parcel, and many of their members are involved in the sabotage of me. And their lifestyle is clearly inferior. And their argument doesn't make sense. And they are the fruit of their illogical argument. Privileged, scatterbrained, unfair, gaslighting, you name it. And so the results, the objective results, are that I'm God's son, and they're idiots.